All right. Good evening, one and all present here. We are here for the live session for the course, NPTEL course on Environmental Impact Assessment. The course instructor is Dr. Harshit Lakra. She is an assistant professor at the Department of Architecture and Planning at IIT Roorkee. You have two teaching assistants from the PMRF side. So PMRF and NPTEL have tie-up where some of the Prime Minister's research fellowship PhD students sort of take over these live sessions. So this is part of that. Two of us are handling these sessions. One is Ms. Isha Rathore, also from IIT Roorkee, who's handling the sessions on Saturdays. And I am Monica S. I am a PMRF and research scholar at the Department of Architecture and Regional Planning, IIT Kharagpur. Um, this is the second week of these sessions. So the live sessions are essentially to sort of have an avenue where a student can raise questions regarding the taught content as well as discuss a few additional questions apart from those that are presented as part of the uh, weekly assignments. So we have these sessions for raising queries which are conducted every Tuesday between 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. As and when I prompt, you may kindly raise your hand. Raising your hand is essentially an option in Google Meet. Yeah, so it's an option in Google Meet, if you can see here. So if you do that, I would get a notification as to somebody has raised their hand. And once I request, you can unmute and raise your query. Or questions can also be posted in the chat box. They'll be addressed either intermittently or towards the end of the session. Right? We also have a discussion forum, which is the Ask a Question tab in the course page, if you've noticed. So any questions related to the live sessions can be asked there, but even otherwise, the common questions will be answered either by the main team uh, doing the course, or one of us, one of the PMRF PAs might also address the same. Right. So in today's live session, we'll essentially have a very, very brief recap of what was taught in the previous week, the week two uh, contents. And then we'll also look at week two assignment questions from the previous round of the course. The answers will be discussed, and where necessary, like some additional explanation might also be given. Then we'll move on to queries from the discussion forum that were raised in the past week or so. And then we'll also be looking at the current assignment questions ka answers because the deadline is anyway over. This will be a very quick overview, like the explanation will be very limited, but in case any of you have a doubt, we can sort of discuss those, right? So recapping the week's content. Also, there'll be a small, short 5-minute break at about 1 hour into the session, right? So week two basically had 5 lectures. Lecture six had addressed definition, process, and purposes of EIA. 7 and 8 covered EIA impact areas, current and emerging. So they were covered in two parts. EIA origin in USA and worldwide development of EIA was addressed in lecture 9, and lecture 10 focused on EIA in India. Right. So lecture 6 where we saw introduction and overview of environmental impact assessment, definitions of environmental impact assessment, EIA as a process, and the purposes of EIA. In lecture 7, we saw typology of environmental impacts, introduction to EIA impact areas. So, and then we delved into details on the biophysical impacts. Lecture 8 covered socioeconomic impact, health and safety, emerging impact areas, and wider impact considerations such as risk resilience. EIA origin in USA and worldwide development, we first saw the evolution of EIA and the experience in USA. Current status of EIA worldwide, we saw a few factors influencing the forms or types of EIA systems. Uh, then we also saw key role of international organizations. Lecture 10 was focused on India. Uh, the first session was contextualizing EIA in India on a global context. Then initial environmental movement in India and the evolution of EIA in India. So if you remember, there were a lot of technical terms like screening, scoping, all those were thrown around. The thing is, these will be dealt with in much more detail later. So this was just an introduction to what the basic outline is, which is why it was so brief, right? So you don't have to, in case there is a doubt, you can raise it here, but even otherwise, it's not as complicated as it might seem now. Over the lectures, you might be able to like comprehend them better, right? So before we go into the week two assignment questions, are there any doubts? Because last week, I think we kept the doubt session to the end and we couldn't really cover it. So if you have any queries regarding the taught lectures or any other queries in general, you may please raise it now. Yes, Mr. Sadiq Hussain, you may please unmute yourself. And is there a question? Mr. Hussain, do you have a question? All right. Yeah, please. I can't hear you. If you're trying to talk, okay, you're
Am I audible now?
yes, yes.
Yes. Okay. What is a strategic environmental impact assessment? Is
Okay,
this something different? What we generally doing or learning from here, that is environment impact assessment.
okay. So
Yes, ma'am.
there is this aspect called SEA within EIA. The thing is, it is going to be dealt with in one of the future lectures at detail by ma'am. So I'm not really going to give you an initiation into it. So it is going to be addressed in the future lectures. That much I can tell you.
Okay, ma'am. Which lecture it would be?
I'm not really sure of the course structure, to be honest.
All right, ma'am.
I what I'll do is I can, if you want a, prompt initially, I can post in the discussion forum, say
Okay.
citing the lecture. Okay,
All right.
all right.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other queries regarding the week two content per se? All right. If not, we'll just move on into the lecture. Yeah. So the first question that we have, answers for these you can post in the chat box, right? Also, pardon any interruption because I'm a little sick, so really sorry about that. So, question number one, what is the title of the Brundtland report published in 1987? Is it Our Environment, Our Common Future, Sustainable Development, or uh, Our One Planet? Any responses? Okay, we've got one response on the in the chat. Any other answers? Anybody else? All right, so the answer is the Brundtland Commission report of 1987 was tagged Our Common Future, as it was shown in the slides as well. So that is, you are right, Mr. Rajagnesh. That's the answer. Our common future was the title of the report. So let's take a look at what this report actually was. So, so the Brundtland Commission, as such, was actually a sub-organization of the United Nations. So it was created with the aim of uniting countries in pursuit of this sustainable development, right? So it was founded in 1983 when the then Secretary General of UN appointed Gro Harlem Brundtland. So it's a she. I mean, the usual expectation that is that it's a he. I mean, even I thought it was male chairperson. Turns out she was the chairperson of the commission. So Brundtland was actually the former prime minister of Norway. Before she became the prime minister, she was the health minister of the country, if I'm not wrong. So, and she was chosen because she had a strong background in the sciences and public health. So she had done her candidature in medicine, which is sort of the equivalent of, doctor as her UG, and then went on to do public health at Harvard University. So then she sort of got involved in the politics of Norway. So she had quite a bit of a career around public health, around the environment, and therefore she was chosen to, head the commission. But what happened to the commission as such? It was officially dissolved in 1987 after releasing this report. So in 1988, the Center for Our Common Future replaced the commission. So this center was formed to replace. So the if you look at the Brundtland report, that's sort of the cover page. So the official name is this: the report of the World Commission on Environment and Development. Right. So if you take a look at the contents, we'll sort of get an insight as to where it was headed, right? So they initial part one addressed the common concerns that were there. So how there was a threat to the future, how we need to move towards sustainable development, and what was the role of the international economy. And then part two sort of outlined the common challenges, which was population and human resources, food security, species and ecosystems, energy, industry, and the urban challenge, which is generally due to growing percentage of the population as well as land use becoming urban in nature. Then part three address some common endeavors such as how do we manage the commons? Commons as in those that are not necessarily a part of a country's extent, right? Like the ocean space, Antarctica, and peace, security, development, and the environment. And with a concluding chapter on towards common action, right? So there were a few proposals for institutional and legal change that were outlined. So that's a basic outline of the report to sort of give you an idea. But it's widely acclaimed for taking the world in this direction, right? Sustainable development. So yeah, moving on to the next question. When was EIA made mandatory in India as per the Environmental Protection Act 1986? Any answers? It's okay if you're wrong, it doesn't matter. It's just about sort of taking your brain to a recall mode. Okay, let's look at the answer. So, although the act, if so, this is the slide. So, ma'am was talking about the implementation of this rather than actually pointed out in the content. But in general, even though the act was sort of promulgated in 1986, the EAA notification in 1994 sort of made it mandatory. Okay, so environmental clearance was made mandatory. Till then, it was present, but it was not mandatory for projects to follow through. Right, so the answer is A. Right, yes, I think some of you are right. So moving on to the next question is: are there any queries regarding this? So whenever an act is passed in the parliament, what happens is there are provisions within the act that make way for other orders or other executive orders. So whatever is passed in the parliament is called a legislative order, legislation or an act usually. But not everything needs to be, sort of run by the parliament. Certain things, if the act sort of prescribes for it, saying, okay, the government can take decisions on all of these, so it's called an executive, right? So orders, we get notifications, government orders, GOs, all of these are executive orders. So this EIA notification was one such, uh, notification which came out in 1994. Please remember. Okay. Moving on to the next question. What does IAIA in the context of EIA stand for? Any answers? Is it International Assembly for Impact Assessment, Indian Assembly for Impact Assessment, International Association for Impact Assessment, and Indian Association for Impact Assessment? Okay. Okay, we have a couple of answers in the chat box, and both of you are right. So it's actually the International Association for Impact Assessment. Right. So in fact, one of the famous definitions for EIA comes from the IAIA. What is this? So that's the answer. What is this IAIA? So if you remember, the NEPA, National Environmental Protection Act, had been drafted by the USA in 1970, like rather 1969, and it came to effect in 1970, right? So somewhere in 1990, these three people, Charlie Wolf, Fred Rossini, and Alan Porter, they sort of had a session on integrated impact assessment, right? So during the session, they sort of emphasized as to how there needs to be an impact assessment association, and there is, none existing as such. And then it sort of became, a bigger thing than what they had just spoken about. And then with the intent of bringing all, like, everybody who was responsible for and figuring out how to conduct assessments, the IAIA was incorporated in 1980. So this happened in the state of Georgia in USA. Right. So this is the IAIA's website. It, we don't. IAIA has more than 100. Okay. The definition, yes, the definition is this one. So it's part of the lectures. You can download the slides from the course page, right? So is there a query regarding the definition? Yeah. I hope I can move on. Right. So these slides will also be shared with you, so you don't have to worry about it. Right. So IAIA has more than 100 countries. I think around 120 countries to be precise. But India doesn't have any direct members. However, WII, so which is a body of the Ministry of Environment, Forest, and Climate Change in India. So it's an autonomous institution under it. They are part of a few initiatives that the IAIA is sort of conducting, right? So that's a small introduction to why IAIA is sort of a multi-net organization that you have to be cognizant of. All right. Uh, Moving on to the next question. EIA is a systematic process which involves a number of steps. Order the following. Is it scoping, screening, impact prediction, and review? Impact prediction, screening, scoping, and review? Screening, scoping, review, and impact prediction? Or is it screening, scoping, impact prediction, and review? Okay. We have a couple of answers, and both of you are right. So if you notice here, so we start with project screening. So essentially, does the project even need EIA in the first place? Like, then we go for scoping. So primarily, which impacts and issues should be considered? I mean, if we go for assessing everything under the sun, it's going to be really difficult, right? Then we go for a description. Then we set the baseline. Here we are looking at impact prediction, right? So prediction of impacts, right? And then further down you have review, right? So the answer is D, like you mentioned. Any queries in this? All right. So that's basically an infograph as to, like, giving you an idea as to what uh, each step comprises. But this is not that rigid. If you look at this, so this was included to sort of let you know that the basic template can actually vary in a lot of countries. However, we'll stick to this one, the one that has been given as part of the coursework. This will be our general template for the AIA process, right? Because here, just because we see the word review, we think, oh, review. No, this is not that review. It's just an overview of the relevant documents, right? So moving on to the next question. All right. Which of the following is covered under biophysical environmental impact? Health, culture, air, and language. Okay, so we have quite a few varied answers actually. Okay, let's see. Let's see what the answer is. So, what are we particularly talking about here? We're talking about biophysical environmental impact. So, why are we talking about impacts per se? Any project will have several kinds of impacts that it's going to have on the environment, right? Either positive or negative. Like any EIA, when we are doing the impact assessment, we are not just looking at, oh, these are the negative impacts that it's having. No, we are also going to be looking at, okay, these are the positives as well. So that a comprehensive or a holistic picture of the project and what it is going to have, what the consequences going to be can be assessed, right? So in that sense, we have a number of types of impact, like broad types of impact areas that are present, right? So first one is the biophysical impact, under which you have these several elements: air, soil, land, geology, flora, fauna, biodiversity, water, noise, transportation, landscape, and visual, right? Apart from that, you have the socio-cultural impact, health and safety, economic and fiscal impact, indigenous people's rights and traditional areas, emerging impact areas, which includes, so these are areas that were probably not that frequently considered initially. However, they are being like more and more considered in the current times, in the present times, right? So, like equality and or deprivation, culture and language, land acquisition, resettlement and livelihood, climate change and ecosystem services. Then we also look at some wider impact considerations, right? Like risk, resilience, and cumulative impacts. So, if you see, air sort of comes in here, yes, but all the others are separate headers in this in themselves, right? So the
Ma'am,
answer
excuse
is
me, I have a
actually, yeah, yeah.
question.
One second. I'll just finish this. So the answer is actually C, right? So yeah, please go ahead now, Mr. Sadiq Hussain.
Impact on the visual.
Sorry,
Impact on visual. Please, could you please go back to the previous slide?
this one.
Yeah, yeah, it's here
Yeah.
on biophysical
Hmm.
impact. After transportation, it's landscape and visual. What is
Yeah.
this visual?
So these two are actually combined. So initially, um, it's more of the physical impact, to be honest, but biophysical. So say you have an environment, okay? So I'll tell it to you at a very normal scale, not at the scale that,
All right,
say,
ma'am.
some settlement is here and they have this beautiful view of a forest. So they have a forest here. It sort of
Okay.
continues on. That's fine. But say they are coming up with another project here that's blocking the entire community's view of this forest. The thing is, if
Oh,
it's just about a view, it's fine. Like, right, the access, visual access is fine. But say there are multiple resorts here that are sort of banking on this view, right? All of these business owners have sort of, placed their emphasis on this view that you get from here. And then there is this huge building that's coming in here. That's not going to fare well for a lot of these population, right? So that's
okay.
sort of to give an idea of what the visual biophysical impact would be, right? So is it altering the sky, or say, let's give
Is
a
it
possible,
some
yeah.
kind of, ma'am? Is it kind of man-made or natural visual?
It can be both. So say you have a monument here, man-made monument here, and they're gaining economy from this view. Say there is some special ancient temple here or something, and then you end up building something here and blocking their view. And their
Okay,
selling point was that I'm talking at a very small scale, right? Like say, and imagine this at like at a big scale. Say there is a mountain view, or even generally, to be honest, forget the economic value of a view. Health impacts can also be there. So human beings
great.
feel better when they're sort of closer to a countryside type of
Okay,
landscape. And then what happens is some project comes in where it sort of becomes monotonous or industrial. They are going to suffer. So we need to take that into consideration. Whether
okay,
it is big enough to stop the project or not is a separate question. But we need to list this down. That's the whole point,
great,
right?
ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. So moving on to the next question. Match the typology of environmental impact of group A with the characteristics of the impact in group B. So we have direct impact, indirect impact, reversible impact, irreversible impact. So even if you know one of the combinations, you can write it down, or if you know the final answer, you can type it down, please. Any responses? Okay, we've got one response, one other response. Okay, okay, let's see what the answer is, right? So first of all, mm, oh, we have several varied responses. So there are two sets of typologies here. So one is direct versus indirect. One is direct versus indirect, and the other is reversible versus irreversible, right? So what is direct or indirect? So depending on the nature of the environmental impact being considered, they can be direct or indirect, right? Direct is when there is air pollution from a factory. Yes, okay. But indirect environmental impact will be this air pollution affecting health, right? Another example that was given in the lecture was say there is water scarcity. That's a direct impact, right? But the indirect impact will be socioeconomic. Say people are not able to do farming, and therefore there is a loss of livelihood. That will be an indirect impact. So so direct impact will be okay. So there is a factor one, and then there is factor two. So there is no real indirect way of going here, right? But indirect is when factor one is sort of affecting the effect, indirectly. It's not really like, okay, so do we know this health impact? Say somebody develops bronchitis or some form of lung ailment. It's not just air pollution, to be honest, and not everybody in this area is going to be affected per se, right? It's only a particular population that's vulnerable to such health issues. So it's sort of an indirect impact on it. Cumulative impact is when, as such, by this project alone, there is no issue, right? However, if you consider this project in tandem with several other projects, say there are four, five of them happening at the same time, then the effect is sort of magnified. Somebody's unmuted. Could you please mute yourself? One second. Yeah, all right. So yeah, so the other aspect that we are looking at is reversibility, whether a project is reversible or irreversible. So certain things that we do to the environment might be reversed. Say deforestation could be slowly at least reversed through afforestation, right? So irreversible is when the changes has done permanent damage. So considering all of this, yeah, one second, I'll address your raised hand in a minute. So considering all of this, so the direct impact will be, say we have what, cutting of trees in the, so I'm not saying cutting off trees in the project area is not a direct impact, right? So you'll have to sort of mix and match so that you get the best option. So extinction of species is something that is irreversible. That's fixed, right? So that goes here. Then, like we said, cutting of trees in the project area is a reversible impact. We can reverse it through afforestation. Here, effluent discharge in the river leading to deterioration of water quality versus deterioration of water quality leading to health impact. So this second degree of things is what we were talking about as indirect, right? So this one is indirect and this one is direct. So the answer turns out to be B. Yeah. Any queries? So somebody had raised your hand. Could you please unmute yourself and then ask the question, please? There is a raised hand. Can't see who it is. Is there a question? All right, feel free to interrupt me later. Okay, so, yeah. Any other queries regarding this? I hope not. It's almost straightforward, right? If you just get the basic idea done and then try to match with the best option available from the existing options, and you should be fine, right? Okay, moving on to the next question. Following aspects are covered under soils, land, and geology. Land use change, soil availability and quality, geological designations, geological resources, and geological formations, or all of the above. Any answers? Okay, okay, okay. Few varied answers. Okay, so those of you who answered all of the above, you're actually right. So this is again directly from the slide content. These are the aspects that are covered under soils, land, and geology. Right? And use change, soil availability and quality, geological designations, geological resources, geological formations, right? So designations are more like formations are the general broad formations. Um, you have these meteoritic formations or you know mountains and such geographical formations itself, geological formations itself are the formations. Resources are where you sort of sand and gravel say you can actually pick up particular minerals or particular components, right? And designations are the individual components themselves. So, yeah, so the answer is actually four. Any queries regarding this? All right, so let's move on. Select the following aspects to assess the impacts on soil: soil contamination and erosion, soil compaction, soil sealing, all of the above. So this is basically to these are the aspects along which we sort of assess the impacts on soil. Right? Okay. Okay. Once again, the answer is sort of directly lifted from the slides. Soil impact, soil contamination, erosion, compaction, sealing, cumulative removal of organic matter. So we will assess all of these to sort of determine the impact on soil, right? Impact of a project or any intervention on soil. So the answer is actually D again, all of the above. Okay, soil compaction also is a, so you are going to change the quality of the soil if the soil gets compacted excessively, right? Because of any project. Okay. Moving on to the next question. Match the thematic impacts of group A with the examples in group B. So we have three of them: economic impact, social impact, or health impact, and three options: health of the receiving community and adaptive capacity, job creations at different levels, quality of life and well-being. So the meaning of this word adaptive capacity, we'll actually return to it later. Okay. So I have another slide explaining that, but okay, again, varied answers. So let's see what the answers are. So from the slides, we have um, economic impact basically deals with uh, aspects like creation, both direct and indirect, as well as multiplier impact. So essentially, uh, job creation, the direct part is when, okay, say there is an industry coming in, right? And then the indirect is all the other economic aspects that come in, like the shops around it or some other industry is reliant on this primary industry and it comes up and they create jobs. So or some service industries come in, that will be indirect. Multiplier impact is because this industry has been created, then therefore it's going to like impact the economy, like boost the economy in a certain way, right? Social impact includes quality of life, well-being, community participation, human rights and environmental justice, change in demographics. And health impact covers health impact assessment, health of the receiving community, and adaptive capacity. Right? So therefore, right now we have economic impact and job creation, yes. Social impact and quality of life and well-being, health impact and health of the receiving community. That's pretty self-explanatory, right? So, any queries regarding this? All right. So, moving on to the next question. Match the following themes in Group A with the description in Group B. They have two things: mitigation and adaptation, and two responses: resilience of the project to climate change and minimizing a project's greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, we have a few answers. Yes, you all of you are right actually. So let's see. So climate change is a very important emergent impact area, right? So there are two aspects that are taken into consideration in EIA. So one is mitigation. Whenever you have a project, we need to minimize a project's GHG, greenhouse gas emissions, or its contribution to climate change per se, like, or adaptation. How much resilience does the project have? Resilience in the sense, okay, I'll explain that in the next slide. Okay, wait. Okay, so I'll explain, go deeper into resilience. Essentially, resilience is when you sort of have the capacity to adapt to change, right? Whenever there is change, if a system breaks down, Okay, it's okay to break down, but does it bounce back? That's resilience, right? When it bounces back, the system exhibits resilience. So this is just to sort of give you an idea. So any action that reduces emissions that cause climate change, right? Any action. But adaptation would be like, how do we manage the risks of climate change impacts, right? So the answer is actually A. All of you are right. Moving on to the next question. State true or false. Resilience is about being protective rather than developing the ability to deal and cope with abrupt changes. Is it true or false? So we have two things. One is being protective and developing the ability to deal and cope with abrupt changes. Okay, let's see what the answer is. Okay. So this actually comes under the wider impact considerations. And I had spoken about the resilience assessment framework, but let's see what when she was talking about it, she sort of points out that it is actually about developing the ability to deal and cope with abrupt changes, not about being protective. So the answer is actually false. Let's see. Okay, let's go a little deeper into this. Say a system starts here. Okay, this is the current state of a system, and then something happens. Say uh, some kind of environmental change is happening, some climate change or something is happening, and the system state starts changing, right? But beyond a point, the system cannot take this change, right? Like all of us, even when we say the weather is like normal, it's a pleasant 22 degrees. I mean, probably that's not pleasant for a lot of people. 21 degrees of pleasant is pleasant for me. Okay, but up to 30, 32, I'm okay. And but there are people who are burning in that weather, right? So everybody has a tipping point. So this system or this environment, this area also has a tipping point, right? So, but 40 degrees and I'm out, like I'm really in pain, right? So beyond a point, people start dying, of course. We get things like heat stroke and all, unless and until we take measures to it. So say the beyond the tipping point, the system starts falling, right? And it falls off. It has come to a low, very low point. What happens is, say this condition is removed, or the condition is present, but right now the system starts modifying itself, right? So this modification that happens, right? You see this peak is resilience. So even though the system has fallen down, it's trying to get up, right? Like it's trying to go back to its original state. What happens is it doesn't always stay at the original state. It sort of overshoots, right? We cannot control, okay, so this much has happened in the world, let's stop. No, that's not how it works. The system starts changing to a different state so that it's in a better place, right? And then it goes on to this new system state, which is not so bad, which is probably better than this point, we don't know, or it's worse, we don't know, but it's not as bad as this point, right? So this peaking is called a resilience. So when a body has high resilience, say, what will happen is, say this is the gray dot is the initial state. It goes down, all right, but it comes back again, right? So it's in a state of flux. But a low resilience body will keep going down and down. There is no recovery there, right? Adaptive capacity is when, say, the system is here. This is point number one. Okay. Then some big issue happens. It goes to point number two. Then the system realizes, like, okay, the system sort of does better in state three. Now the changes occurred. It goes to state three. It's not permanently there, but sometimes it is in state three and sometimes it is in state one, so that it doesn't break down. So it's constantly adapting itself towards change so that the system itself doesn't break down. So the adaptive capacity term, right? Currently, we're looking at resilience, but that's adaptive capacity. So therefore, resilience is not about being protective. It's actually about developing the ability to deal and cope with abrupt changes. All right. Any queries regarding this? I hope that's clear. We call this model the ball and basin model. It's a very famous way of, explaining resilience to people. Okay, moving on to the next question since there are no queries. Match the cumulative impacts categories mentioned in Group A with its description in Group B. So there are several types of cumulative impacts that we can have, right? There can be time crowded, space crowded, nibbling, or synergistic. Uh, and these are the descriptions. We need to match the descriptions. Any answers? Okay, we have a couple of answers. Even if you don't know all of them, you can just post the individual components. All right, let's see what the answers are. Okay, so these are some of the definitions of cumulative impacts. So when like say when there are changes to the environment that are caused by an action in combination with other past, present, and future human action. So it's you cannot just see one project in its isolation. What if it's having a bigger impact because of other projects that are happening along with it, right? So these are the four types that ma'am covered in her lectures: time crowded, space crowded, synergistic, and biblic. So if you remember, so what is time crowded? Okay, the explanation slide is misplaced. One second. So this is an example of cumulative impact. Okay, so this is one type of cumulative impact, but let's see what happens. So say there is one human pressure. Say there is some kind of project that is being developed there. Okay, that is the pressure that we are going to put in now. Some other pressure is happening, global warming, say. Some other pressure is happening. There is a coast, so this is an island. Okay, so there is a coast and shipping activities increasing. Some other pressure is happening, say tourist activities increasing. So several human pressures. What will happen is this coast will start getting affected not by just one of them, but by several of them, right? And some of them might end up. So say this is impacting 10% usually, and this is impacting 10% usually. These two might actually end up impacting much more if they happen together. There might be such impacts also. So this is essentially cumulative impact. So the four types, there are several other types to be honest. The four types that we are dealing with here is time huddled or time crowded actually. It's the same thing. So say there is one place and there are several actions happening like one after the other, right? It's just for the same place. So what happens is several things are happening, therefore rather across time it keeps happening again and again. So this is the action, the black dot is the action, and the effects keep increasing because we keep doing several things, say global warming, emissions, but it's not just okay, or there is an oil spill that happens, there is an earthquake also that happens like, at the same time. Like so not everything is man-made, right? So something happens, then that area is affected again and again. So say this one area is present, there is something happening here, there's something happening here shortly after. It's not in the same area, but this point is getting affected by several things consecutively. That is time huddle. So repetitive mining, for example, right? Space huddle is when high density perturbation effects on the environment in the same place. So what happens is, so mining can actually be an example of both. One is you keep mining at the same place deeper and deeper, that is fine. That is one thing. Say you are mining around an area in several points, right? So these spots will end up getting affected. So if you generally during mining, what happens is the water level and all will drastically change. So this spot will get affected by all four mining projects, say, then they are much more highly affected, right? So it's not a single mining project then. It's a group of four. Compound effect or synergistic. One is when several things happen together and they sort of become more than one. Like the impact is sort of like multiplied, right? So, for example, smoke generated from sulfur oxides and nitrous oxide compounds, right? Nibble effect is when the increase or decrease is gradual. For example, gradual reduction of farmland. What happens is we wouldn't like feel the effect immediately. We'll think, okay, things are fine. It's just a bit of farmland. It's just a bit of farmland. But it keeps going on, and then we don't have fertile farmlands anymore because we've sort of occupied them for some other use, right? So that's the nibble effect. So considering these, if you look at this first one, where impacts of various activities are too closely spatially placed. So that's called spatially crowded. Incremental erosion of a resource that till there is a significant change or completely is used up. So incremental erosion is nibbling. So where different types of impact interact to produce qualitatively and quantitatively different impacts. So different types of impacts interact. That's sort of the keyword. So it's synergistic. And when impacts are so close in time that the effect of one are not dissipated before the next one occurs. So that's time crowded. So something need not be just time crowded. It could also be space crowded. It could be more than one type, right? So the answer is C. Any queries? All right. Okay. Looking at the next question. The population bomb in 1968, which warned of the dangers of overpopulation such as mass starvation, societal problems, environmental deterioration, was written by Paul Ehrlich, Rachel Carson, Michael Pollan, or Paul Hawken. Okay, we have a couple of answers, and both of you are right, actually. So the answer is Paul Ehrlich. If you remember, this is the Eldritch that Anne Eldritch is his wife that we spoke about last class, right? So okay, let's so that's the answer, yes. But let's also look at what happened. Like, okay, so this book came in, it sent out a ripple in the environmental movement across the globe, yes. But whether impacts positive or negative, the answer is actually both. So the impacts were positive because people suddenly realized, okay, you know what, we are going to have an explosion of population and we need to do something about it, right? So it was partially correct that yes, population is becoming a problem. We are sort of running out of resources, or we are the carrying capacity as such with the current technology is going to be tricky, right? So it was the population bomb was not just the name of this book. There was a brochure before this book, which was called the population bomb, right? So the thing is, it's sort of so there was this guy called Malthus. I don't know how many of you know it. Malthus is somebody who sort of proposed, said, who made this statement that human beings should not develop technology or anything to save lives. So his argument was people should die at a natural rate. There is a reason why people die, and like only because we're increasing their lifespan, there is a overpopulation. If somebody has to die, and if you're not giving them, some sort of artificially prolonging their lifespan, they're going to die off, and the earth is going to be, better off for that. So that this famous philosopher, uh, his name is Malthus, and anybody who sort of suggested on the same lines, right? Essentially, Eldritch is also saying the same, like he's not saying the same thing, but something similar. That if we have overpopulation, we are going to have mass starvation, we are going to not have resources, we need to really control this. It's considered a Malthusian, neo-Malthusian is what we call it, right? But it has led to a lot of controversy and a lot of debate. So especially when this whole population control or population bomb, people started focusing on how the developing countries are the ones primarily contributing to it, right? It's not the developed countries are somehow fine, they're not having this explosion. For example, India, right? Like we do have uh, a very high population increase rate. India, China, for that matter. So these countries were for African countries where the fertility rate is quite high. Fertility rate as in how many babies are born per woman. So this book particularly actually took a very odd view on India. So his argument back then in 1968, he made the argument that you know like India is not going to be self-sufficient with food in 1971. Why? Because look at the population, right? Funnily, all kinds of international agencies sort of, followed the book. So countries with higher populations were penalized, saying, do something about it. And what were they asked to do? They were asked to go on mass sterilization drives. I'm pretty sure some of you might have been witness to this mass sterilization movement. Uh, in India, even though we attained self-sufficiency, we had the Green Revolution, right? We did it through technological improvement, but no, because people were stuck to this narrative. Okay, more population is a problem. You reduce the population, I'll give you money. Happened, right? So by the end of 1972-73, we had 3 million sterilizations in India, and most of them were forced, and most of them were mass sterilizations without much regard for the health of the receiving patients, right? Sometimes people were coerced, sometimes forced, sometimes, like forced beyond human rights considerations. So this was an outfall of this whole population bomb. But to be honest, we cannot penalize him just for this, right? It's not that was not the intention, perhaps. Of course, these are lines lifted from the book, yes. So nonetheless, um, it did have positive impacts, but it does have a continuing negative impact as well. Right? So the ideal situation would be to create awareness rather than force people into mass sterilization and all. That's just to give you an idea of the whole debate around population bomb. Right. So before we go on to the next question, let's take a 5-minute break. Right. To those of you who have joined late, the sessions actually start around 6. I'm not saying you shouldn't join late. Just to let you know, the session is from 6 to 8. The recordings are available online. You don't have to worry about that. But let's take a short break. Let's meet back at around 7:10. All right. I hope that's fine.
Break. Hi guys, is there anyone from Delhi?
All right, we'll resume the session for now. I hope people are back. All right, so let's go back to our questions. So, looking at question number 14, right? The Cuyahoga River incident in Ohio in 1969 is known for A. Fire because of increased sedimentation, B. Fire because of pollution, C. Fire because of water sports, or D. Because of flooding. Any answers? I hope I've unmuted myself. Yeah, okay. We have one response. Any other answers? Okay. Okay, all of you are actually right. The answer is B. So, looking at the slide, basically it was the upper surface of the river had quite a bit of, oil floating on it and basically caught fire. So the answer is B. So this was another one of those key incidents in the history of the environmental movement. Mm, what happened is it had actually caught fire quite a few times before that, right? But this fire was quite brief, to be honest, and nobody even caught an original photo. Like people didn't know of an original photo when somehow an older photo of the incident was published, right? So from 1948, a photo was published where the river was on fire back then as well, and it had kept happening continuously again and again and again, right? So if you look at it, you can see the slick, the oil slick uh, floating on the river. That sort of is the reason for this whole thing. As the environmental movement picked up pace, this incident sort of kept coming back and again and again. So this was one of the cartoons in a famous newspaper. So I mean, to be honest, I took a couple of seconds. That's microbes, right? Like because of the amount of industrial waste that is coming into the river, mm, the microbes are dead. The health of the river itself is dead, is what they're trying to point out at. You can see the amount of pollution from, the amount of slick that is stuck to these two people's uh, clothes. Right? So that's just to give a basic idea of what happened. You can read more in this particular article. Right? Moving on to the next question. When was the National Environmental Policy Act signed into law? I said it was operationalized. Right? Signed into law is operationalized. Mind you, this one was actually drafted in 1969. Okay, and it's also called the NEPA 1969, but its operationalization happened when. So we have one answer, and you're right, Mr. Hussain. The answer is actually 1st January 1970. Yeah. Yeah. So this is a very, very good informatic infographic that I found online. So I think the Zoom is not that great. I've shared the, you can check it out here, right? It's actually an issue of this Resources magazine. It sort of covers all the major events and moves that have happened since the NEPA, which is 1st Jan 1970, up till the Paris Agreement. I just thought I'll share this with you. Okay, moving on to the next question. As per the court ruling, what is true about the case of Calvert Cliffs Coordinating Committee Incorporation et al. Petitioners versus United States Atomic Energy Commission and United States of America respondents of 1971. This is again an important case. A procedure adopted by Calvert Cliffs Coordinating Committee failed to comply as per the policy of NEPA, or procedure adopted by the committee complied with NEPA. Procedure adopted by the Atomic Energy Commission failed to comply as per the policy of NEPA, or did it comply with NEPA? Which of these slides is true regarding this case? Any answers? I'll actually give you a brief history of what happened. That way you can actually remember the answer. Okay. The answer is correct. The answer is C. So let's see. So this is what was shown in the lecture, right? So what actually happened was, so answer is C. The Atomic Energy Commission failed to comply as per the policy of NEPA. So let's see. So why is this an important case? Because it is the first important court interpretation of the NEPA. So any act, any law that comes into the picture, and say some court, any court of, say in case of India, particularly the Supreme Court is, the highest uh, judicial body that we have. They pass something, they say something about it, and there is a court decision that comes, judgment that comes out, that also becomes part of the law of the land, right? So if they say, okay, you know what, this is not all right, like what this law says is not all right, people cannot implement the act in spite of it actually being in practice. So that is what happened here. So there was nothing wrong with the NEPA, but the interpretation of it, for the first time, two people had interpreted it very differently, and it was resolved by the court. So in 1966, which means it's before NEPA, right? The Baltimore Gas and Electric Company had actually purchased a plot of land in Maryland. They wanted to build a nuclear power plant, and they applied for a license also. In 1968, they began construction of the plant as well. So over time, people became concerned with what was happening. There is actually this particular blue crab population that's there in that bay that scientists were worried about, and they sort of analyzed as to what the impact is going to be. In this process, this Calvert Cliffs Coordinating Committee was formed. All right, so that's the background. So we have construction going on in the plant, and the committee was formed, right? So let's look at a it's a short video as to what exactly happened in the case.
The National Environmental Protection Act, or NEPA, went into effect in 1970. Shortly thereafter, an environmental group worried about the impact of a new nuclear power plant sued to clarify the role of environmental impact statements in Calvert Cliffs Coordinating Committee versus United States Atomic Energy Commission. Section 101 of NEPA required the federal government to, quote, use all practicable measures, unquote, to protect the environment. Agencies considering applications for construction permits were directed to prepare detailed statements of environmental impacts and possible alternative measures that might reduce environmental damage.
So up till here, the 2 points are that any agency that is involved, they must use all measures to protect the environment, right? And whenever you're considering some form of license, you're supposed to actually do these. One, you should take an environmental impact assessment. Detailed statement is that. And alternative measures should also be
Might
outlined.
reduce environmental damage. The Atomic Energy Commission proposed a set of rules that it would use to review applications for construction permits for new nuclear power plants.
So what happened is, okay, NEPA said so that you need to get an EIA detailed statement of impact assessment, yes. And Atomic Energy Commission was the federal agency that is giving grants for nuclear plants, right? So what happened was when they issued the new rules, they said that whatever agency is applying, you need to come up with an environmental impact assessment. Like the report needs to come from whoever is applying, right?
Which included requiring applicants to submit their own environmental impact analyses. The Calvert Cliffs nuclear power plant had already received a construction permit without any consideration of environmental issues, but it had yet to receive an operating license. The citizens group Calvert Cliffs Coordinating Committee was worried about the impact of this plant on the Chesapeake Bay ecosystem. It challenged the Commission's proposed rules, arguing that they didn't require the Commission to do a sufficiently detailed environmental analysis and wouldn't protect the environment. The United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit granted review.
So essentially, what happened in this was after this happened, they basically pointed out to the flaw that Atomic Energy Commission did, although they revealed that, okay, you need to bring an EIA report, they did not really comply with it, right? They had already given a construction permit to this project, and the project construction was going on. Uh, this was the case. So, this aspect about the procedure being adopted by the AEC was not as per the policy of the NEPA. That is the issue. That is the highlight of this case. So that was the first time something about the NEPA was considered like misinterpreted by two different parties. It was brought to the fore. So that's just a bit of extra information so that you can remember it, right? So moving on to question 70. Keynote address of the then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi at the United Nations Conference on Human Environment, UNCHE, held in Stockholm in the year which year? That's the question. 1965, 72, 80, or 85. So this is actually called the Stockholm Conference. Right, you are actually right. So this was pointed out in the, I think the year was actually not mentioned, but the conference actually happened in 1972. Right. Moving on to the next question. The following picture represents A. Culture of Uttarakhand, B. Women empowerment, C. Gender equality, and D. Chipko movement. I think this is one of the most famous pictures that we keep seeing from our school times. Yes, all of you are absolutely right. This is the Chipko movement. So this was you can find some additional content as well regarding the Chipko movement from the videos that have been suggested in the course. The answer is D. So let's take a look at this map, which will be provided to you, is just to give an idea of the major environmental movements that have happened in India uh, in the past few decades. So there were a few mentions even in the lecture, right? So the Chipko movement was originally located here. Of course, it started spreading to other states as well. Then another important thing that was pointed out was Save the Narmada movement, right? Narmada Bachao Andolan. If you can see the Silent Valley movement happened here. These are other movements, other major movements that actually happened over time, just to give a basic idea. some extra information. This is another bit of a timeline. It's badly drafted because it's starting from here, if you notice. So sorry about that. So it's actually from this source. So this is the source, right? So the timeline is sort of moving in this direction. So 1730, that's the first Chipko movement, right? So 363 villagers died, right, trying to protect local trees. And then what all happened after that? So it came down to even 1987 May, New York celebrates Chipko Day. That's these are significant events considering the Chipko movement, right? So I just thought I'll share this with you. Again, the slides will be shared with you. This is just some extra information. Right? Question number 90. State true or false. In India, screening for EIA is done on the basis of a defined list which provides types and thresholds of values of the size of the project. Is it true or false? Okay, all of you are correct. It is true. So we have actually what is called as the Schedule 1 usually. So which sort of gives you the threshold, right? Both types and threshold values. Threshold as in what is the size of the project in various terms, right? So for example, here it's given on the basis of area, what is the type of activity, right? So based on this only we sort of take decisions as to how uh, we take decisions on the screening for EIA, whether a project needs EIA or not, what type of EIA is required. We'll be dealing with the details later in further future lectures as well. But yes, okay. Moving on to the next question. Central Pollution Control Board serves as a field formation and also provides technical services to the Ministry of Environment and Forests for of the provisions of the Environment Protection Act 1986. Actually, for is it true or false? So this is not directly coming from the slides, but yes, essentially yes, all of you are true. It is true. It's both a field formation as well as it provides technical service, right? All right. So any queries? This is the second query session for the day. Any queries regarding the taught lectures or any other assignment questions? I do have the assignment questions here, but I don't think we actually have the time to discuss all of them. So any general queries, anything you would like to raise? All right, I will have another 5 minutes towards the end of the lecture, so you can post it in the chat box also. I would address that as well. But let's move on to a few questions from the discussion forum. Uh, Unfortunately, I think that people posting the questions in the discussion forum are not checking our videos, so I will be posting a link of the corresponding part of the lecture there as well. Nonetheless, so there was one question that was raised as to what was happening here. I think. One second. This will be addressed later.
Missy number.
No, this was addressed in the last lecture. I actually don't remember very unfortunately. All right, let's just move on to the next question. I don't remember why I had included that. So there was one question as to what is the difference between environmental impact assessment and life cycle assessment, whether they are similar. So the thing is, environmental impact assessment, you have a particular area, okay? In that area, there is some project coming up. Okay, this project is coming up, right? Because of this project, what is the impact that this project is going to have on the environment holistically, whether it's going to improve the environment including people's lives? Is it going to make it better, worse? Is it going to affect the environment? What is going to happen? So it's site and context specific. Okay, and how it actually impacts on the environment, right? Okay, so this is say city A. Sorry, I'm using a mouse, so pardon the handwriting. So, and it's usually applied on like huge like projects, infrastructure projects, such, say a metro is coming up. What is it going to do to the city, right? So, how is it going to affect the people living right next to it, or is it going to affect people living far away? How is it going to affect? So that's EIA, right? Life cycle assessment, on the other hand, is for a particular product. So it's not site specific. We are not going to say, oh, in city A, this product is going to have this impact. City B, no. Generally, if you're implementing or manufacturing a particular product, say something as simple as a fridge. Generally, a fridge from this particular, uh, it can be brand specific, it need not be. A generic fridge, if you are manufacturing it and you're putting it to use, right? So you'll manufacture it, you will use it, somebody will use it in their house, and then you will dispose it, right? It'll be disposed of in some landfill or something, or recycle, parts of it might be recycled. So along this entire life of the product, in this case a fridge, how does it impact the environment? So in the manufacturing phase, there might be emissions, you might be taking in resources, you might be creating certain amount of waste, you might be consuming water. What all is it affecting? And then when it is being used during the operation phase, it might be consuming electricity, there might again be emissions. What is the issue? When you're disposing it, certain chemicals might be, brought back to the environment, and that's going to be problematic too. So life cycle assessment is product specific. Okay, so it's for a particular product. Environmental impact assessment is for a particular project implemented at a site. I hope that clears the query. Moving on to the next question. So which among the options does, okay, so this one, which among the options does the Coral Triangle region include? The answer key says Indonesia and Philippines, but yes, Malaysia is also an answer. I don't know why it has been missed out here. It will be pointed out to the team. So I'll probably send them an email. So this is the like this is from Wikipedia only. The blue color region is the scientific area, right? So it's the official part that we say that okay, there is a lot of marine biodiversity here. But we have something called the Coral Triangle Initiative, which is comprised of 6 countries, if I'm not wrong, and Malaysia is one of them. So I will notify the team. As far as I know, I think Malaysia is also part of it. From wherever I Google, whatever I do, Malaysia seems to be part of the answer. Nonetheless, this clarification will be provided after discussion with the team, the main NPTEL team and ma'am. So the next query was the process through which methyl mercury is passed along the food chain is called bioaccumulation, bioconservation, bioacceleration, or biomagnification. So the claim was that it should be bioaccumulation and not magnification. But no, the answer is actually biomagnification. I'll tell you why. So passed along the food chain is the key here. Okay, so biomagnification is you move from one individual to the other on the food chain. So there is movement across the food chain. But bioaccumulation is, sorry, bioaccumulation is essentially accumulation within one individual itself. So there is one individual and it keeps absorbing more and more and more of methyl mercury. So that's like in this case, methyl mercury. That's bioaccumulation of methyl mercury. Biomagnification is okay. So this one has absorbed it, and then some other bigger animal eats it, therefore it gets it. So it's moving across the food chain. So this, therefore, the answer is correct. Biomagnification is the correct answer, and they've mentioned it correctly. Okay, so Yeah. So any other queries? Okay. So we have which regulatory authority or institution plays a role in EAA at the national. So if you remember the administrative structure of the whole. One sec. Yeah. So at the center in India, it's going to be under the Ministry of Environment and Forest, or state government may it will be some Department of Environment, right? We will look at the individual, for example, what about queries? So we have tribunals also handling some of the things. The detailed administrative framework as and when it comes up, because each project will go to a different type of EIA, right? So this has been brought up in the chat too. Those of you who like, I should have read it out loud. Which regulatory authority or institution plays a role in EIA at national level, state level, and district level? So this is the basic framework. I hope you can see my screen. Yeah. So this is the basic framework, but the detailed framework will depend on the project, and we'll see as it comes in the future lectures. I hope that's okay with you. All right. So any other queries, any other questions, any other general points? I do have, yeah, yeah, don't mention it. I do have questions from the current session also, the week two. Any particular question that you had an issue with or anything? Otherwise, we can go ahead and look at the answers very quickly.
Yeah, ma'am. I think let's go ahead with the answers.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Because then if there is a conflict somewhere, somebody can raise it. All right. So this is from the current run. Week two assignment questions. The questions answers have been revealed, therefore we're going through it very briefly, right? So first question: find the correct match for the following pairs of drivers and pressures relevant to the marine environment. This is actually a follow up from the previous week lectures, but nonetheless, direct drivers: tourism, shipping, and agriculture. Indirect drivers would be food, construction, recreation, and energy. And then principal drivers would be population growth, urbanization, economic development, and climate change. Any answers? Like since you've already answered the. Okay, so this is directly from this chart, right? So it's more about like just jot it down somewhere and then you can remember it. Direct drivers, indirect drivers, principal drivers, right? Sorry, principal drivers. So comparing that, so direct drivers, tourism is there, shipping is there, agriculture is there, right? Indirect drivers, food, construction, recreation, energy, and the principal drivers are correspondingly there. So the answer is actually all three, A, B, and C, right? Feel free to stop me in between. Moving on to the next question. Complete the following diagram of economic development process in its environmental context. So the key again is to remember sort of like remember a few basic things, then like you don't have to worry about remembering it so exactly. So we see outputs and wastes. So input has to come from one of these A and B, right? So then C basically is feeding back post environment. So that has to be the resource depletion part. So that already gives us the answer, right? So this is from this slide. This is also a recap of the previous week's content. So A will be input, B will be economy. So there is input to the economy, and then there are outputs, there are waste being generated, there is an impact on the environment, and there is resource depletion. So the answer is A. Yes, the answer is A. You are right. So third question, state true or false. According to the International Association for Impact Assessment, EIA is defined as, we saw it earlier, if you remember, the process of identifying, predicting, evaluating, and mitigating the biophysical, social, and other relevant effects of proposed development project proposals prior to major decisions being taken and commitments made. So it is actually very, very important that you remember all the definitions, right? Like you can't really skip over them because there'll be small modifications here and there and you'll slip. So the important thing in this is prior to major decisions and commitments made. So that's sort of key in this definition. So the answer is true. Yes, this is the definition that was given by IAIA. I'm skipping a few questions because they were sort of repetitive and already addressed in earlier today, right? So next question, in India, when was the right to fair compensation and transparency in land acquisition, rehabilitation, and resettlement act? Like when did it come into existence? Bad English, sorry. So 2013, 14, 15, or 16? Yes, sir, you're absolutely right. So the answer is 2013 actually. Uh, this is important because it sort of uh, will be woven into the impact assessment, right? So if there is going to be a land acquisition or rehabilitation or resettlement as part of the project, how are you supposed to compensate them? Like, what is the a standard operating procedure that needs to be followed is something that we get from this act, right? So, moving on to the next question. Complete the following diagram of global stresses. Okay, again, not apostrophe S. So, we have four of them: societal, environmental, economic, and geopolitical, right? So, if you can sort of figure it out from the content, for example, interstate conflict, failure of national, regional, and local governance, terrorist attacks, state collapse or crisis, all those will be geopolitical, right? So the term is sort of explanatory. So D is geopolitical, and there you go. The answer is fitting in. But if you look at it, this extreme weather events, natural disasters, climate change, all of these would be actually environmental. If you look at it here, fiscal crisis, failure of infrastructure, asset bubbles, energy price, all of these sort of point towards economic, right? And then water crisis, food crisis, they're essentially societal crisis. So it's coming from this chart. It's adapted from WEF ka publication, World Economic Forum ka publication, right? So that's the answer. Societal, environmental, this will be economic and geopolitical. Any queries till now? I hope not. These are all straightforward. Uh, moving on to the next question. In the ESPO convention, what are the major obligations of parties? So, what are parties? Parties are all the signatory states, whichever states have sort of signed to be part of the convention, right? So, A, to assess the environmental impact of certain activities at an early stage of planning, and B, general obligation of states to notify and consult each other on all major projects under consideration that are likely to have a significant adverse environmental impact across boundaries. Across boundaries. So it's not just about, oh, the next country is going to get affected. No, it's sort of like a general obligation. This is not a mandate, but this is compulsory for all member states. So, which of the two are uh, part of the ESPO convention? The answer is actually both A and B. So, from this slide, if you remember, it's called the ESPO convention because that's the place where it happened, ESPO. But the actual convention name is Convention on Environmental Impact Assessment in a Transboundary Context, right? So yes, the you are right. The answer is both A and B. All right. So moving on to the next question. As per the timeline of the EIA evolution across globe, what were the major milestones during 1990s? Increased use of GIS and other information technologies. India has also adopted the EIA formally. EIA introduced by NEPA in US or use of EIA by developing countries. Sorry. Such as Brazil, Philippines, China, and Indonesia. What all happened during the 1990s? So let's look at the slides. So we're looking for so in early to mid 1970s, you see that NEPA has been passed, right? Then late 1970 and early 1980s, I think one of the options is here. So, use of EA by developing countries. These developing countries, particularly, not all of them, but Brazil, Philippines, China, and Indonesia. Right? If you look at mid 1980s to end of the decade, these are the things that happened. But in 1990s, yes, we see that India has also adopted the EAA formally, as in it's mandatory, and you increased use of GIS and other information technologies, right? So yes, what were the major milestones during 1990s? It will be these two, A and B. Okay. So moving on to the next question. What are the various contextual factors influencing EAA system? Political system, environmental status, international convention, civil rights. So again, so these are all the contextual factors which are sort of going to determine what type of EIA system we have. How are the thresholds? How is the screening going to be done? How is the scoping going to be done? Right? Yes, you are right. The answer is actually all of them. Right. So this is the slide that has all of them. In fact, there is also culture of public participation. How much public participation usually happens or is allowed also, and influence of the EAA system in each country. Rather, these influence the EAA system in each country. Right? So, yeah, so all of the above is the answer. Okay, so take true or false. There is a slight bit of extra information in this. So, the late Prime Minister Indira Gandhi said the environmental problems of developing countries are not the side effects of excessive industrialization, but reflect the inadequacy of development. The rich countries may look upon development as a cause of environmental destruction, but to us it is one of the primary means of improving the environment for living or providing food, water, sanitation, and shelter, of making the desert green and the mountains habitable. So improving the environment is actually from an anthropocentric perspective, right? So did she actually say this or not? Yes, you are right, she did say this, right? But she didn't just say this, she actually said something else also. So what happened? This is part of a speech in the Stockholm conference that we earlier spoke of. So the Stockholm conference is significant because it is one of the first global level events talking about the human environment. Okay. So when people were talking about environmental impact, okay, developing countries should cut down emissions, CAO, she sort of, brought about the debate, and it's still controversial, by the way, as to how, okay, people are dying of poverty. Are we really going to be just looking at the environment, right? Like, so this is actually part of the speech. Are not poverty and need of the people the greatest polluters? So her argument was that you might think that development is environmental destruction because you are essentially developed, right? But we sort of need to do this to stabilize our society, get rid of poverty. So this was something that actually, shook the world. So therefore, this speech is very significant in the environmental movement. Right. So moving on to the next question. Narmada Bachao Andolan was launched in which year? It's a straightforward factual question. The answer is 1985. Okay, so directly from the slides. And the environmental clearance process includes Water Act 1974, Air Act 1981, Noise Act or Noise Rules 2000, and Hazardous Waste Management and Handling Rules 1989. Yes, all of the above. So it also actually includes the Forest Act also. No, these are things again that you are supposed to remember. Like it's not something that you can just pass off as common knowledge. So the answer is, in fact, all of the above. So with that, we come to the end of the session. I've tried to give as much extra information as possible and explanation as possible, but it's actually become quite, factual in nature. So I've stuck to the basics mostly. Probably in the next lectures, I'll again try to give a bit of background information as and where possible. So I hope the lecture was useful.
Yes, ma'am. It was very much useful, informative, and
Thank you.
motivational as well.
Thank you so much. So all
Thank
of
you.
you can feel free to, bring up your queries if you want, us to particularly address something more, like elaborate on something. You can post in the discussion forum, because it's not really happening in the immediate next week, right? Like already week 4 ka content is out, which means there is a 2-week gap. So you can post in the forum and we'll try to address that as well. I hope these sessions are coming out to be useful, and thank you so much for joining, because it keeps us going as well. I know.
Thank you, ma'am. When we can see again.
Next week again. So there are two sessions. So one will be on Saturday. That will be Miss Isha Rathore, but I will be taking the session on 21st. So
Okay, ma'am.
yeah,
Thank you
yeah.
very much.
I'll see you again then. If there are
See you.
no other queries, I think we'll close the session.
All right, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you
Have
all
a
for
nice.
joining.
Thank you.
Thank you. You too.